One of the central discussions concerning religious Zionism in all its forms, whether it's permitted or prohibited, comes out of a discussion of what's known as the Shlosh Shavuot, the 3 oaths. Michael, do you want to mute your microphone?
Oh, sorry.
No problem. It says in Shir HaShirim twice the following verse. It's chapter 2, verse 8, chapter 3, verse 5. Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim b'tzvaot or b'ayalot hasadeh im te'iru v'im te'oru et ha'ava ad shtechbatz. I make you take an oath, or I adjure you, the daughters of Yerushalayim, by the deer and by the gazelles of the field, if you will wake me and be awakened, the love, until it is sated. It's a very similar pasuk in Shir HaShirim Perek Hey, pasuk Chet. Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim im timtzu. Pasuk Chet, Perek Chet, pasuk Dalet. Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim ma te'iru u'ma te'oru et ha'ava ad shetechbat. If you will wake up and if you will awaken the love before it is sated, leaving out b'tzvaot or b'ayalot hasadeh, the deer and the gazelles of the field. There's another very similar pasuk in Shir Hey Chet. Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim imtzeu et dodai ma tikidu lo shecholat ava ani. I adjure you, the daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? That I am lovesick. All right. Those are the psukim that are critical. The third one is not one of the 3 psukim we're talking about because it's not about the awakening. But it's useful to know that there is such another pasuk there. Tana Rabbanan, the Gemara in Ksuvos on Kuf Yud Amid Beit learns that our rabbis learned La'olam yadur adam be'eretz Yisrael afilu be'ir sheruba nochrim ve'al yadur b'chutz la'aretz afilu be'ir sheruba Yisrael. A person should always live in Israel, even in a city that has a majority of non-Jews, and he should not live chutz la'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, even in a city that has a majority of Jews. Shekol adar be'eretz Yisrael doma k'mi sheyesh lo Eloah, because anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, it's as if he has a God. V'chol adar b'chutz la'aretz doma k'mi she'ein lo Eloah, and anyone who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael, as if they do not have a God. Shenamar, as it says, L'teit lechem et Eretz Canaan, liot lechem l'Elohim. To give them the land of Canaan, to be their God. V'kol she'enu dar be'eretz ein lo Eloah, and anyone that does not live in Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't have a God. The Gemara questions, how is that possible? Elolomer lecha, it's telling you, kol hadar b'chutz la'aretz, anyone who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael, ki'ilu oved avodah zarah, is if he worshipped idols. V'chen b'David hu omer, and so too with David HaMelech it says, Ki garshuni hayom mistapeach b'nachalat Hashem, that you have chased me out of Eretz Yisrael from being on the inheritance of God. It's a pasuk in Shmuel. Lemor, as if to say or saying, Lech avod Elohim acharim, go worship other gods. V'chi mi amar lo leDavid lech avod Elohim acharim. Who told David HaMelech to worship other gods? Ela, but lomar lecha, this is telling you, kol hadar b'chutz la'aretz, anyone that lives in chutz la'aretz, ke'ilu oved avodah zarah, as if he worshipped idols. Rabbi Zera have mishtamet minei de Rabbi Yehuda. Now we get a very interesting story, that Rabbi Zera was running away from Rabbi Yehuda. As we'll see, Rabbi Zera Rabbi Zera wanted to make Aliyah, and Rabbi Yehuda has a prohibition on making Aliyah. So Rabbi Zera, who's a Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda, didn't want his Rebbe telling him that he couldn't make Aliyah. So he was hiding from him. Why? To boy the Meisakler Eretz Yisrael, because he wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael. Dama Rabbi Yehuda, as Rabbi Yehuda said, Kola Omer Ola Mibavel Eretz Yisrael, anyone who makes aliyah from Babylon to Eretz Yisrael, over ba'aseh, he has transgressed a positive mitzvah. Shinamaris, it says, Bavela yuva'u, v'shama yiyu ad yom pokdi otam ne'um Hashem. To Babylon they will go, and there they will be, until the day that I remember them, affirms God. This is part of the nevuah of Yirmiyahu, part of Yirmiyahu's prophecy concerning the destruction of the first temple. Rabbi Zera says, Hahu b'klei sharis ksi. This pasuk is not talking about people, it's talking about the vessels used for service in the temple, that they will be taken by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon, and they will stay there until God appoints the time to build the temple. Rabbi Yehuda ksiv kra'achrini. And Rabbi Yehuda has another verse, not only this one. Rabbi Yehuda is also aware of this problem. These pasukim actually are talking about the vessels, not the people. So he says the following verse: Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim b'tzvaot or b'ayalot hasadeh v'gomer. I make you swear, the daughters of Jerusalem, by the deer and by the gazelles of the field, that if you will wake up the love before it is sated. Rabbi Zera, Hahu shelo yalu Yisrael b'choma. And Rabbi Zera says that pasuk is not saying that we can't make aliyah. It's saying that we cannot make aliyah against the will of the non-Jews, or all of us together, or by force. What the word bechoma means, we will look at more later. Rabbi Yehuda, Hishbati achrini ksiv. I have another time it says this. Rabbi Zera, Hahumi boy leilech Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. And what does Rabbi Zera have to say about this? He says we need these other ones for what, or better, I learn like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Ta'amar, what did Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina say? Shlosh shavuot halelu lama. These 3 oaths, what are they doing? Achat, the first one, shelo alu Yisrael b'choma, that Israel should not go up with choma, together with strength. Va'achat shehishbia HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Yisrael shelo yamradu ba'umot ha'olam. And one, that Bnei Yisrael should not revolt against the nations of the world. Va'achat shehishbia HaKadosh Baruch Hu et umot ha'olam shelo yishtabdu behen Yisrael yoter midai. And the last one is that the nations of the world should not enslave or afflict Israel too much. Now, it's interesting that the first 2 are Shavuot to Bnei Yisrael, and the third one is a Shavuot to the nations of the world. And if you look and you remember that the first 2 oaths that we found were phrased one way, and the third oath was phrased slightly differently, which may account for the difference in how Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, learns the who is being adjured, who is taking the oath. For Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda, what does he say? Im te'iru v'im toru k'tiv. It says twice, so that there are more than these 3 oaths. There are in fact 6 oaths, 1 te'ir and 1 to'oru, which are 2 different verbs for waking, 2 conjugations of the same verb for waking up. Rabbi Zera. And Rabbi Zera, what does he do with these extra forms of the oaths? Mi boy leilech Rabbi Levi. He needs it for Rabbi Levi, what Rabbi Levi said. Da'amar, as Rabbi Levi said, Sheish shavuot halelu lama. What do I have these 6 oaths for? Tilta hani da'amran. The first 3 are what we already said, that they shouldn't go up with force, that they shouldn't rebel too much against the nations of the world, and that the nations of the world should not enslave them too difficultly. Inach, and what about the other 3? Shelo yeglu etikates. Anyone that knows when Mashiach is coming is not allowed to reveal that to anyone else. Shelo yirachaku etikates, that they shouldn't do anything to delay the coming of Mashiach. Shelo yigalu hasod nochrim, and that you shouldn't reveal the secret to the non-Jews. What this secret is, there are 2 opinions brought in Rashi. One is the way that we intercalculate the year and the months to make our solar lunar calendar. And the second one is the reasons of the Torah. So what does the phrase mean, b'tzvaot or b'ayalot hasadeh, by the deer or the gazelles of the field? Amar Rabbi Lazar said, Amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yisrael, Im etem mekayimim et hashavua mutav. If you keep the oath, it is good. V'im lav, and if not, ani matir et b'sarchem k'tzvaot u'ka'ayalot hasadeh. I will permit your flesh like the deer and the gazelles of the field. That's the end of the Gemara on the 3 Shavuot. So, as we've already mentioned, we have these 3 Pesukim in Shir HaShirim. Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim b'tzvot or be'elot hasadeh im ti'iru v'im toru at ha'ava ad shtech. I adjure you, the daughters of Israel, by the deer and by the gazelles of the field, if you will wake up and if you will stir the love before it is satiated. And that's twice, and the third time is Hishvati etchem b'not Yerushalayim im ti'iru v'im toru et ha'ava ad shetech. I adjure you, the daughters of Jerusalem, if you wake up and stir the love before it is sated. And based upon these Pesukim, we saw that the Gemara asks, what are these 3 oaths? The first one is Shelo Yalu B'choma, that they shouldn't go up with strength. V'achad Shishbiah HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Yisrael Shelo Yimrdu B'omot Olam. One is that they should not, the Bnei Yisrael should not rebel against the nation of the world. V'achad Shishbiah HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Umot Olam Shelo Yishtabdu Behem Yisrael Yot Midai. And the third is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should not enslave the nations of the world too much. The last 2 Shavuot, at least in terms of the way they're constructed, the literal wordage, the first 2, I'm sorry. But the first Shavua of Shelo Yalu B'choma, what does it mean that they should not go up in Choma? The second 2, we can understand the words. The third one, we have a problem with. What does the word actually mean? Mefarish Rashi. Rashi says, Yachad biyad chazaka, as one with a strong hand. That is to say, that if Israel goes up to Eretz Yisrael as one group with power, with strength, force, the Marsha on our Gemara explains these words in following Rashi. Shelo Yalu Yisrael B'choma, that Israel should not go up B'choma. Ratzono Lomar, that is to say, Vadai dereshut l'kol echad miYisrael la'alot le'Eretz Yisrael. It is clear that everyone has permission. Any individual has permission to go up to Eretz Yisrael. Ela shelo yalu b'choma biyad chazaka. They shouldn't go up together with a strong hand. Livnot lehem chomot Yerushalayim, to build the walls of Jerusalem. B'Nehemiah she'amar b'nivnei chomat ha'ir. And in Nehemiah it says that we will build the wall of the city. Below Niyeh, and that we will not be, we will not be low in the eyes of the nations around us, where everyone has their capital as a fortified city, and ours will not be. Bereshut HaMelech, this they have the permission of the king. K'mo Sham, as it says there, Va'af divrei HaMelech asher amar li, and these are the words of the king that he told me, that I should go up, I should gather the people, and with that, we should reconstruct the city. So you see that the Choma apparently is the opposite of what they did in that time. Meaning, what they did in that time would be Bechoma, perhaps, if they hadn't had permission of the king.
Rabbi, I don't understand that.
So the Marsha has stressed two things here. As long as we're talking about individuals making aliyah, there's no prohibition of aliyah, right? Even if it would be apparently against the will of those that are ruling Eretz Yisrael at that time. And the second thing, even a communal aliyah is not prohibited if it is done with the permission of the government and not against their will. That biyad chazakah means against the will of the government. And it's worthwhile to stress here that historically, when the Turks ruled Eretz Yisrael for the First World War, many Jews made aliyah, including many great Talmidei Chachamim, even against the desire of the Turkish government. The Turkish government would give permission for people to come to visit the land, to be tourists for a limited period of time, as long as it was not more than 3 months. It's interesting that the standard visa you get when you enter Israel today is a 3-month visa that they stamp in your passport, right? If you want to stay more than 3 months, you have to get permission from the government, but the standard passport is 3 months. The standard visa is 3 months, which is the same as what the Turks gave. And even so, we find many Jews who came up, and after that they remained past their visa. They hid, they did different things. And this fits in exactly what the Marsha says. That they can't go up with force against the together. But individuals could. The ability to make aliyah against the will of the government of individuals was allowed. It was only if it was a communal effort that it would be problematic.
What's the point of citing?
One should also pay attention to the words of the Marsha, Yachad biyad chazakah, together with a strong hand, is again only when it's against the will of the government. But if there's Reshut HaMelech, if the king gives permission, there is no prohibition of making aliyah as a group and to building the walls of Yerushalayim, just like Nehemiah did.
Could I ask for clarification of that? It seems that Nehemiah is talking about a specific historical circumstance. So why is that used to generalize from that time to all time?
Well, in Nehemiah's time, right? Koresh gave the Jews permission to rebuild their land. Correct?
Yes.
And the construction of the second temple is used as the paradigm for the construction of the third temple. So if for the Jews to return to Eretz Yisrael and rebuild the second temple, they could do it when they had permission of the king. So too, as soon as permission has been received to rebuild Eretz Yisrael, then it would be permitted for a group of Jews to make aliyah together in a communal way. Is that clear?
Yes.
All right. The Sakachava Rebbe, Rabbi Avram, wrote similar things in the Avnei Nezer Yerdei Siman Tav Nun Dalet, paragraph Nun Vav. She'im yutan shut l'kol Yisrael alot. If permission is given to Israel, to all of Israel, to make aliyah, lo yechashev she'olim b'choma. It will no longer be considered as if they are going up b'choma, which is the prohibition in the Shavua. Ki b'choma, Perush Rashi, because when it says choma, Rashi explains, biyad chazakah, with a strong hand. Gam yesh lomar ki im yutan reshut l'kulam yechashev b'kuda. That if all of us would be given permission to make aliyah, it would be considered a order to make aliyah. It's interesting he uses the word pekuda and not mitzvah. In English, both of them are a command. Those of you that know the song B'ma Yavarech, how will we bless the child, and the child ends up dying, and it goes through this. The verses go through the stages of a child's life. When the child gets old enough to be in the army, he learns the pekuda. He learns the lingo of orders. And of course, a mitzvah is a commandment, which is also an order, so to speak. There's not that much difference. Why is he using the word pekuda and not mitzvah is something that could be thought about. And I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe he's saying that it's not the same level of obligation as putting on tefillin or something like that, but it's still obligatory in nature. I think that's what the Sukkot is trying to say here. So if we would be given permission from the nations to make collective aliyah, it is possible that this is now the divine command, divine order, in the beginning of the process of redemption. It's not only that the aliyah will be permitted, but it will be considered a divine order. The Avnei Nezer continues to write there. Devar masha ketavti ba'ot nun vav. Concerning what I wrote above in paragraph 56, she'im yutan reshut lekulam lalot lo yeh shavua, that there would be no shavua preventing it. De Rashi piresh, that Rashi explained b'choma biyad chazaka, with choma means against the will of the ruler. V'im b'reshut ein zeh biyad chazaka. If we're given permission, it's no longer biyad chazaka. V'kvodo hi'ir shebesefer habat Yonatan k'tav afilu b'reshut asur, and your honor brought to my attention that in the Sefer Habat Yonatan, he wrote that even if we were given permission to make aliyah, it's prohibited. Divrei drashahem. This is a drasha. Ve'elef kiyotzi behem lo yazizu divrei Rashi mimkomam. This and 1,000 other drashot like it will not move the words of Rashi from their place. Ve'hagon maharizal ba'atzmo l'dina lo hayazaz miperush Rashi. And this author himself, when he is in fact talking about what the halacha is about this, he did not move from the words of Rashi. He in fact accepted Rashi lahalacha. When he's making a drasha, you can say anything you want. There's an interesting rule that is ein meshivin ala drush. That means you don't respond to a drasha. Meaning someone can say what they want, and it's to teach a lesson, it's to do something, whatever. That doesn't mean that halachically I have to take this as being of serious import. And this is what Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer writes, that those that say that there is a prohibition because of the oath to go up to Eretz Yisrael and live in it. This is in Drishat Zion, the Mosad Rav Kook edition from Tavshin Samach Beit, page 127. Vomnam. But al Dvarat Shavuot Elokim Ha'amor, concerning the divine oath about what is said, Asher Aleha Yisogu Achor Milakshiv L'Divrei Hanavi, that because of it, people are retreating from listening to the words of the prophet. V'al tzitnu domi lo ad yechonein ba'ad yasim et Yerushalayim tehila ba'aretz. That you should not give, it should be in silence until it will be established, until he will place Jerusalem as the glory of the land. It's in Yeshayahu. Al zeh yashiv amar lecha b'shnei drachim. In this I will respond in two ways. Ha'echad, the first, ki ezhara mata iru mata oru, hu rak bal na'alei biyad chazaka l'chomot Yerushalayim, that we should not go up with force to the walls of Yerushalayim. V'lo hishpiyanu rak shelo niyeh min hamapilim lalot hahara b'chazaka, that we should not be like those, in fact it's in this week's Parsha, that go up to the mountain in force against the divine will. Ava lirtzot avanaha lifol eretz noshevet, but we should desire her stones, and we should make Eretz Yisrael a lived-in land. Matov u'manaim. How good and how pleasant is this? Ein lecha mitzvah gedola mizu. There is no greater mitzvah than this. Kasher birarti ba'arucha, like I have already explained and clarified at length. V'ki yalei aladat. And if it would occur to you, shekasher amad Nehemiah alav hashalom, b'roa panim lifnei melech Koresh, that if Nehemiah had appeared before the king Koresh with a bad face, v'itchanein lefanav livnot chorvot Yerushalayim, and he supplicated before him to build the walls of Jerusalem, hagam ze ka'over al shavua lazu chas v'shalom, was he also transgressing this oath, God forbid? Meaning, if you are going to say that we have to wait for Mashiach to come before we're allowed to do anything, then Nehemiah, when he asked Koresh for permission to build the temple, he was obviously violating a divine order. And we can't say such a thing. It's impossible to say that Nehemiah is viewed as one of the Nevi'im, that he was in his primary life's work, in what he is famous for in Tanakh, what we have essentially an entire Sefer in Tanakh written about, was in fact a prohibition. Halo lo b'chazakah halach. He did not go with force against the will of the government. Rak b'ulat tachanunim natan Hashem yitbarach chino b'lev hamelech. It is only through his supplications that Hashem, he should be blessed, gave him grace in the heart of the king. V'chavatz Hashem biyado v'hitzliach. And God desired and found favor in what Nehemiah was doing, and he made it successful. Ken yisov bal hamisibot yitbarach lanu. So too, this will be what the owner of causes will do for us. Meaning, just like God caused Koresh to change his mind and allow the Jews to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael and to rebuild Eretz Yisrael, so too the same God will cause in the same way the nations of the world to allow us to make Aliyah. This was written about 160 years ago. One should stress that Reb Kalisher was speaking 100 years before the United Nations decision and before the San Remo decision of the League of Nations concerning the rights of Israel to their land. Rav Kalisher still saw it went from his point in time, and hoped that this is how things would come out. Just like has happened to Nehemiah in his generation, so too we would also receive permission from the world, from the nations of the world, from those people that controlled Eretz Yisrael, to rebuild Jerusalem. This idea is found in other places as well, that future processes of redemption and so on are going to be in the same way as the previous ones were. And so you find this parallelism, just like God caused Koresh to give Nehemiah the rights to rebuild Eretz Yisrael, so too we would also be given it. We've seen other references this as well in the past, that we were given the rights previously that we studied about to rebuild, to make Aliyah, that this should be the national home of the Jews, and so on. So in terms of the prohibition of Shelo Yalu B'Choma, it's only when there is no permission, and since we have permission, so therefore that Shavuot should not exist. That's one way in which to respond to anti-Zionistic religious polemics. Next, Sar Pachad HaShavuot, that the fear of the oaths has already turned away. Concerning what has happened internationally concerning Eretz Israel after the First World War, Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, the author of the Or Sameach and the Meshech Chochmah, wrote the following letter. It is quoted. The letter is published in Menachem Kasher's Sefer HaTekufa Gedola. It's interesting to remind you for a minute. Menachem Kasher was the Gerer Chassid that the Rebbe sent to establish Gerer Chassidut in Eretz Israel and to build the first Gerer Yeshiva in Eretz Israel. So he's not exactly, you wouldn't exactly think of him as being from the Zionist camp. And however, as you'll see, he wrote a sefer called the Tekufa Gedola, the great epic, and he wrote it in the immediate following of the Six-Day War. So, in his sefer, he quotes the Or Sameach as saying as follows, and this is immediately after the San Remo Accords were voted on. Amnam ke'et hisabaha hashgacha, but at our time, the providence has caused asher ba'asfat hamamlachot haneurot b'San Remo, through the gathering of the enlightened kingdoms in San Remo, Nitan Tzav, the order has been given, asher Eretz Yisrael tieh la'am Yisrael, that the land of Israel will belong to the nation of Israel. The kevan shesar pachad HaShavuot, and once the fear of the oaths has been removed, Rishayon Hamalachim kamat mitzvat yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and with the permission of the kings, the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael has been raised up. Sheshekula keneged kol mitzvot shebatorah, that was measured and equal to all the mitzvot of the Torah. Limkoma, it is returned to its place. Mitzvah al kol ish, it is commanded upon every person. L'sayim b'chol yecholto l'kayim mitzvah, to help with all of his ability to fulfill this mitzvah. It should be noted that the Or Sameach, Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, was up to this point very, very much in the anti-Zionistic camp. The San Remo Accord seems to have reversed his entire outlook toward Zionism and changed the way he viewed the Zionist movement. He was also aware of the fact that for millions of Jews to move to Eretz Yisrael at that point was impossible. There wasn't the ability within the state of Israel to within Palestine to support such a large population. It's interesting that this week is the 70th and 60th anniversary of the national water carrier in Israel, and it was originally the idea and the first developments of it were to counter the white paper, because the British white paper said there wasn't enough water in Eretz Yisrael to have a greater population, and therefore the number of Jews allowed to immigrate into Eretz Yisrael had to be quite limited because of this. So the Sachnut, the Jewish agency, commissioned an engineer, I can't remember his name, to work on the idea of a national water carrier so that to show that there was a possibility of bringing water from the water-rich north to the water-poor south to increase the possibility of the land holding so many people. So the Meir Simcha, being aware of that, is saying we can fulfill this mitzvah since not everyone can make aliyah with financial donations and so on. Whatever it is that they need, we should do everything within our ability, he's saying, to fulfill this mitzvah. However that would be, whether it's personal aliyah or other things. The Or Sameach saw in the decision of the League of Nations the negation of the Shavua. At the minute that the nations of the world expressed their agreement that Israel should return to the land, Sar Pachat Ha'umot, the fear of the nations has been removed. And therefore, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah of the commandment to live in Eretz Yisrael, returns to its place. He relates to the decision of the League of Nations, and we can add to this the decision of the United Nations that was accepted 30 years after that. In this way, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook Zitzal also explained these things. In Netivot Yisrael, Volume 1, the Mitzvot Haaretz. Hachoma hagalutit shel shiltonot hagoyim. The wall that causes the exile of the rule of the nations of the world. Shikifet artzenu b'shavuoto aleinu, me'az galinu v'nitrachaknu mimenu. This oath that has kept us away from the time of our exile, and it is distance us from the land. Shelo na'alei aleha, that we should not go up to it. Huplu b'davar Hashem lebitul shavuazot. It was brought down by the word of God to negate this oath. Al yidei ha'achraza ha'pumbiyot shel malchei artzot v'sarei lo'omim. Through the public declarations of the kings of lands and the ministers of governments, of nations. Alahoda hazuchutenu elokit alartzenu, through the admission of our divine rights to our land. Vakamat monot, he's talking about the British mandate over Palestine. L'shem hakarat chazartenu lebinyan beit chayenu, and this is to recognize our return to build the house of our life. As was typical of the pre-Second World War European world, it was viewed that non-Europeans were not capable of ruling themselves, and that the mandate had to be given to one of the United Nations to develop the land, to develop the people, so that it would be possible for them to develop into what was necessary. In another place, in his essay in the same book, El Mishmar Ha'am HaYisraeli, on the watch of the Israeli nation, the Jewish nation, Hinei mitocha uvahamshacha ve'al yisoda shel Hatzarat Balfour, and it is within it, and is the natural development from its statement of the Balfour Declaration. Ba'alidei gemar bitui hashalem, it comes to complete the expression, bitulo shel hakodesh baruch hu et shavuato shelo yalu b'choma. It is the negation of the oath that they should not go up with choma, with the strength, the yad chazakah, together, and so on, shel Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Yisrael. B'siluko hamamashi et choma al yidei gilui hakaratam shel shiltonot ha'umot, that with the real removal of this wall, this barrier, and through their open recognition of the rule of the nations, b'yisod hamandat shel Hever Alumim al Eretz Yisrael, with the establishment of the mandate of the League of Nations on Eretz Yisrael, et zechutenu ha'elokit al artzenu, it is the divine right of us to our land, hoda'at haskamatam l'charzartenu, shama, and their knowledge and agreement that we should return there, livnot u'lihibanot ba, to build and to be built by it. It's interesting. We build Eretz Yisrael, and at the same time, we are redeveloped as a nation. We grow, develop, and so on. In a way, it's reciprocal. The more we build, the more we're developed. And after we have clarified that the Shavua that relates to going up to Eretz Yisrael is biyad chazakah, against the will of the nations, and they have already given us permission, one can still ask the question, is not this permission in the end the same way the Apala, the same way that the Jews who didn't want to accept delay after the report of the Meraglim and tried to conquer Eretz Yisrael again, wouldn't our Aliyah do the same thing right now if there isn't a if there isn't a messianic event, wouldn't we have the exact same problems as that they had? The answer to this is that after the wall has been brought down, according to what our rabbis have taught us, then we are going according to the divine word. And how do we know that it is the divine time to begin returning to Eretz Yisrael? This is shown to us by the decisions of the League of Nations, by the decision of the United Nations, and so on. And at that point, the oath disappears. And as sort of says, what was the purpose of the British mandate? Right? Why were they? Because they were a modern, strong, advanced, liberal nation. They are supposed to help the Jews that don't have experience in how to develop a country for 2,000 years, to reestablish themselves. And this is what's written in the Balfour Declaration. But after this, the British rebelled against their assignment, so to speak. They were told to do one thing, and they ended up, for their own internal reasons, decided to change what their mandate was supposed to be. The Satmar Rebbe, who is, of course, very, very famous for his opposition to Zionism, he wrote an entire book upon it. His entire Torah of opposition to Zionism and to the state of Israel is based upon these three oaths. In V'yoel Moshe, which is made up, it's a very large book, but it's made up of 3 essays. The first one, which is I think about half of the book, deals entirely with this issue of the 3 oaths. And he absolutely prohibits any form of aliyah in our time. He writes there, V'yesh tipshim ha'omrim, there are those fools that say, Shian shaya behaskamat rov ha'umot, that because it was through the agreement of the majority of the nations, Ein kan lo isur shavua lo isur havara ala kates. There is no prohibition of the oath. There is no prohibition of forcing the end to come sooner. V'chol kach gavar hahashchot v'smiyot einayim shnafu ala olam l'taot b'divrei chavalim ke'elu. And so much has darkness and blindness of eyes fallen upon the world that they follow these vanities. When you relate to what he said, there are other things to prove this. But how can you relate to the phrases yesh tipshim, there are fools, havelim ke'elu, and vanities like this, especially when you're talking about people like the Marsha, Rav Kalisher, the Avnei Nezer, the Or Sameach, right? It's you can disagree with someone on the content of what they say, but the expressions that the Satmar Rebbe is using are not in any way addressing the argument. They are dismissive of the argument of Gedolei Olam, of people that he has to admit are Gedolei Olam, by saying they're fools and it's vanity, therefore I do not have to address what it is. In his entire thing, he never addresses the connection that the Marsha makes to Tanakh and those that follow in his footsteps, like Reb Meir Simcha of Dvinsk and the Sakachava Rebbe and so on. We'll touch a little bit more later on the position of the Satmar Rebbe, but we'll leave it here for now.